Hello and welcome to Insights, the podcast with your host, Joe Pane. Join me in this deep exploration of our personal journeys from ambition to meaning, where we stop living life fast and start living life deep. This is a journey of waking up and realizing that our lives have never been about us, but about others. True success leaves positive ripple effects on other souls. I believe that success needs to be redefined from our own personal ambitious endeavors to be redefined as the value that we leave and give to others around us. Join me now as we begin this journey to deeper connections, even more fulfillment, some fun, curiosity, life, love, and all good things. Your deeper journey from ambition to meaning starts right now. G'day everyone, welcome to episode 38 of Insights. Joe here, and thank you so much for joining me. And I'm loving your beautiful 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. And if you haven't done that and you feel that this is a 5-star podcast, I would love for you to do that. So today, today I'm going to focus today on what I call the 6 needs of the ego. And these are very different to maybe previous episodes where I've spoken about core drivers. These are specific needs of the ego. I think the ego mechanism is quite misunderstood by a lot of people. And fundamentally, in my coaching and consulting and training space, I define the ego as fundamentally as a survival mechanism designed to make us feel safe, to feel secure, to feel good. It's fundamentally a survival mechanism that's all the way from physical through to energetical and emotional. So it's a mechanism that we use in order to find our way in this world. So, and of course, it's a very complex kind of thing, the ego. But what I thought I would do today is I would highlight to you when the ego is at play really strongly. And because quite often people go, gee, how do I know when my heart's speaking, when my ego's speaking? And that's a really good question. Fundamentally, before I go into these 6 needs of the ego, fundamentally, whenever we're coming from fear of any kind, we're coming from our ego. And when we're coming from love, we're coming from our hearts. That's a very simple way of putting it, but that's a good macro kind of way of working it out. So, for example, extensions of fear are things like frustration, judgment, labeling, anger, impatience. These are all extensions of fear. Whereas love, extensions of love are feelings like appreciation, gratitude, healthy perspective, laughter, joy, peace. All these are extensions of love. So however we express ourselves, whether from fear or from love, is a clue about whether we're coming from our ego or coming from our hearts. Now, I want to break this down in even more detail with these 6 particular needs. And I remember Sharon Pearson saying to me many, many years ago when I first started delivering workshops. This would have been back in 2006. I still remember this to this day, where I received some negative feedback from someone about a workshop that I was doing. And she said to me, from now on, be a trainer that has got nothing to prove and nothing to defend. Nothing to prove, nothing to defend. And I took that comment to heart, and that changed the direction of my training career. It also added a lot of value to my personal life as well. So that's another way of knowing whether you're coming from ego or coming from heart, is that if you're defending yourself or proving something for the sake of it, then you're coming from ego, because your spirit, your soul, your heart has got nothing to prove and nothing to defend. It really hasn't. So let's break this down even further. Let's go into these 6 needs of the ego. And I go into a lot more detail into these 6 needs of this ego in my Emotional Fitness Formula online program, which is due to be released very, very soon. I'm very excited about that. So the first one is what's known as the need to look good, the need to look good. And what I want to share with you as we go through these 6 needs, and as I'm about to explore with you with this particular need, the need of looking good, is that each of these needs can be expressed unresourcefully or resourcefully, one or the other. Unresourceful is like the dark side, and resourceful is the light side. Because as the Skyhook said in the 1970s, ego is not a dirty word, right? Do you remember that song? And if you were born after 1990 or after 1995, you probably have never heard of the Skyhooks, and that's just simply disgusting. All right, so go to Spotify and look up Skyhooks and listen to the song Ego is Not a Dirty Word. It is phenomenal. I love it. Anyway, back on track here. So I want to give you a balanced perspective of ego, because it is a survival mechanism. It is a fundamental mechanism that we use when we're consciously aware of it. We can use it in very, very healthy ways. And we can also use ego in very unhealthy ways that hurts other people's feelings. So each of these 6 needs I'm about to share with you, there's an unresourceful way and a resourceful way of meeting them. So let's go back to this first one, the need to look good. So the need to look good, an unresourceful expression of the need to look good is when you're putting others down so you can feel better about yourself or look good. In other words, how many times have you experienced perhaps where somebody else has subtly put you down so they can feel better about themselves? It feels awful, doesn't it? Well, sometimes you and I might be guilty of doing that, where we're saying something, we're, show offy or talking about something so we can feel good about ourselves, but we haven't actually checked in to see whether what we're sharing is actually raising the other person with us. Because if it's not raising the other person with us, then we're unresourcefully expressing this need to look good. So the dark side of it all is when you're looking good at the cost of somebody else's feelings. That's the unresourceful side. The resourceful side of looking good is when you're doing the right thing by another person, when you're being quite you've got an abundance mindset in terms of what you're willing to give and share and add value at no need for a return of anything. So you're looking good in the eyes of that other person. So you're looking good, but they're also raised in the spirit of that as well. Does that make sense? So the unresourceful side, generally for all of these 6 needs I'm about to cover, I'm covering with you now, is that the unresourceful side pulls others down, whereas the resourceful side brings people with us, if that makes sense. And you can also role reverse this, because when someone does an unresourceful need to look good with you and me, then we feel like crap and they are raised in the wave and we're at the bottom of the wave, if that makes any sense. So we want to be raising together. We want to be going with others over the wave together, if that makes sense. So the second need of the ego is the need to be right. Oh my Lord. Has this been one of the biggest contributors to relationship breakups? The need to be right. So the unresourceful expression of this is when you make others feel crap for being wrong, right? None of us like it when someone says, I told you it was going to happen. I told you so. Like we don't like to be told. The ego does not like to be told. So if we're being right by making others feel crap for being wrong, we are expressing this need to be right in an unresourceful way. What about a resourceful way? How do we do that? That's a good question. So the need to be right is resourcefully expressed when we know that we're right. And I'm not talking egotistically here, although I kind of am, but it's when we are proven to be right, but we don't actually say anything. It's done. Like there's nothing to say. Like the other person gets it. It's all good. Like as soon as we start saying things like, I told you I was right. I knew it. That's just you proving the other person to be wrong. And depends on the context of the conversation, of course, because this is not completely accurate. But on the balance of probability, that's kind of how it works. It's unresourcefully where we're putting other people down. So the resourceful expression of the need to be right is where we are, we're right about a situation, we're factually accurate, and we don't have to say anything, and we don't say anything, and we don't have anything to say because why? Because remember, resourcefully, the ego has nothing to prove, nothing to defend. Unresourcefully, it's got heaps to defend and heaps to prove. The third need. So the first one was the need to look good. The second one was the need to be right. The third one is the need to justify. The need to justify. Now, the unresourceful expression of that is when we're doing exactly what I've just been sharing with you, saying something to prove ourselves or saying something to defend ourselves. Anytime we're doing any of that, it's an unresourceful need to justify. The moment you need to justify to someone why you want to do something or why you don't want to do something, you're defending yourself. So, oh no, I don't want to go to the party tonight because, and you have to make up some excuse or some lavish justification in terms of why you don't want to go. The answer to that question is, I just don't want to go tonight. Period. Full stop. Don't justify it. Does that make sense? So the unresourceful expression of the need to justify is when you are defending yourself. The resourceful expression, what about that? How do you do that? Great question. So the resourceful way to express the need to justify is when you justify to yourself why you need to do something for yourself. Or another way of putting it is, it's like, in other words, whenever I buy something and it feels good for me to buy that particular thing, whatever that thing is, I don't need to justify it to the world or to anybody else. I can justify it to myself. And in my own inner world, just like your inner world, we know why we're buying that particular thing, whatever that reason is. Or another way of saying this is that it's when you're justifying to yourself why you want to experience something, why you want to do something. It's a more inner world, resourceful expression of it, because you'll find that everything that you do in life, like for all of us really, whenever we're buying a new clothes or a new car or a new, something, for example, just looking at purchases as an example here, we're always justifying purchases to ourselves. And you can do that unresourcefully or resourcefully. So unresourcefully is when we're justifying a purchase in order to show off to the world. That's an unresourceful expression of it. But a resourceful expression is because we're buying it because it feels good. It feels good to have that, nice watch or whatever the thing is that turns you on. Does that make sense? So that's the need to justify. The fourth need, the need to know. Oh dear, the need to know. The unresourceful expression of this, I think you can guess what that is. The unresourceful expression of the need to know is pure and utter gossip. Prying into other people's businesses that are simply not our business. Gossip and drama and carry on. What a waste of time. And we're all guilty of this. We've all done this. And I have put conscious effort into reducing this as much as I can to zero if I can in my current life experience, because talking about other people in a very negative way, and guys, this can even extend out to, and I'm guilty of this next bit very much. In recent times, I'm very guilty of this. Or where I'm talking negatively with a friend about the politicians of our country or the leadership and all this sort of stuff. That's an unresourceful expression of gossip, if that makes sense. And gossip is the need to know. Maybe not so much with the politicians, because we're not really talking about someone that we personally know. But when we're actually gossiping about people in our knowing, the people that we actually are connected with, I think that's really, really low quality. Resourceful need to know. What's the resourceful need to know? Well, I love this, because the resourceful expression of the need to know is when we have a healthy curiosity about someone just to get to know them or to get to understand them or appreciate them, asking high quality questions. Does that make sense? So it's very, very different to prying your nose to where it doesn't belong. Massive difference. So I'll say that again. The need to know unresourcefully is when we're gossiping for gossip's sake, for entertainment, at the cost of somebody else, right? And resourceful expression of the need to know is when we have a healthy curiosity about somebody else or something else in order to understand it or understand them better. Does that make sense? So that's a resourceful expression. The fifth one, there's 6 of these. The fifth one is the need to judge. The need to judge. The unresourceful expression of the need to judge is when we're labeling others, of course, labeling other people or assuming that we know what their motivation is behind their actions. Judging away. We know how awful it feels to be judged or how awful it feels to be grossly misunderstood. It's incredibly frustrating. So I think unresourceful expression of the need to judge is when we're doing that to others, labeling other people or labeling their actions or trying to, we think that we know why they're doing what they're doing. I'll give you an example, right? I mean, there was a tenant in one of my properties that recently broke her lease, right? And I'm selling the property, and she didn't. I didn't know that she didn't know that I was selling, so I assumed that she was wanting to break the lease because I was selling the property. I assumed that. So I was judging my tenant's actions based on what I assumed to be fact. When I got to the bottom of all the facts, it was just a coincidence of timing that she decided she was going to move on anyway, and I was happy about that because I'm going to sell it anyway. So do you see how this often happens in life, where actions happen and we see it through our own filters and we misunderstand the intention of other people's actions? And this happens all the time. So we can't assume that we know that. So unresourceful expression of the need to judge is when we're labeling other people or labeling other people's actions and thinking that we know what their motivation is. We simply don't. Resourceful expression of the need to judge. What about that? Well, how do we do that? Well, I think that's really a really powerful one, because the resourceful expression of the need to judge is when we're assessing a risky situation, to move to safety. So, for example, we need the need to judge if we're walking down a street and we're not getting a good vibe about the person walking behind us. And we just don't get a good vibe. So we make an assessment of that, and we'll make a decision to walk to the other side of the street or to move away from that energy. Does that make sense? Without the need to judge, without the judgment filter, we couldn't possibly walk to safety if we didn't have that. So that's one of the positives of ego, is that it's designed to keep us safe. One of the negatives of ego is that often the ego unresourcefully or negatively keeps us safe from our psychological ghosts, the things that we've made up in our head. But the ego is very, very useful when it comes to us keeping us safe from real threats, such as, maybe a person that we feel we shouldn't be walking next to. I mean, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by this, because I am going to be misunderstood if I leave it hanging there. A person that we shouldn't be walking next to. I mean, these days, everyone's so bloody sensitive. But I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I remember coming home from one of my trainings one night, and I did a U-turn to get to my driveway. I have to kind of do a U-turn. It's too hard to explain, but I'll just leave it at that. I had to do a U-turn, and it was in the dark, and I did this U-turn particularly quick, and there was this guy in the middle of the road. It was a pedestrian just crossing the road, dressed all in black. It was in the dark. I think I said that. And so I didn't see him until the last second, and I swerved him. I missed him by a fair bit. I got an almighty fright, but can you imagine the almighty fright that the pedestrian would get having a set of headlights coming straight towards you? I mean, that would be 100 times more scary than being in the car, because as a pedestrian, it's life-threatening. In the car, it's more emotionally threatening, if that makes sense. So anyway, long and the short of it is, I pulled up in my driveway, and this fellow turned around, and he came over to the gate, and he was bellowing out all kinds of abuse to me, and justifiably so, by the way. And I apologized for going that quick, and I apologized to him about 3 or 4 times. And this guy, his energy, his eyes were so dark. I thought to myself, this is the kind of person you just don't want to mess with. Like, I reckon he's done stuff, if you know what I mean. Like, it was just that heavy, dark energy. So that was my judgment, the judgment part of my ego, assessing the situation to manage how I would respond. Because a big part of me just wanted to react. A big part of me just wanted to tell him to, F off and all the rest of it. But instead, I just apologized, because I thought, just diffuse this, and walk away. Because if I stoke this fire, I'm going to be hurt here. So that's what I mean by judgment. I'm trusting that makes sense. The sixth and final need of the ego is the need to get even. Oh my Lord, is this a big tempter or what? So the unresourceful expression of the need to get even, of course, is revenge, payback, a slanderous reaction in order to get back to that person. We instantly want to do that if we're hurt by somebody emotionally. And that's the unresourceful expression of getting even. Now, the resourceful expression of getting even is a beautiful one. And this is where an example could be us, you and I, making up for lost time. That's getting even. Or, we failed at a goal and we decide to reset and get back on the horse and have another go at that goal. That's a resourceful way of getting even. I remember in 2015, 2016, and 2014, I had many failed attempts at my running a marathon to try to get to a certain time. And in 2017, I went on a mission with my running part of my world to get even, to get even with myself, to get even with the, I guess, the journey of running, if that makes any sense. And I had this amazing race where everything came together. And I ran just a beautiful race for 42 kilometers. It was just everything just aligned, all the stars, the energy in my body, the nutrition, everything worked out beautifully. And I ran a great time. I'm so proud. I was 3 hours and 31 minutes for a marathon, and I was wrapped with that. My goal still is to go sub 3:30, and time's running out, but I'm getting there. I'm going to keep going with this journey. But the point I want to make is that I didn't allow previous failures to define my future. So the point I want to make is that the need to get even is that when you and I fall off the horse, or when things don't quite work out, a resourceful way of meeting this need to get even is where we get back on the horse and we have another go, and we gain from the wisdom of the experience of the prior failings, so we can, do what John Maxwell says, in life, continue to fail forward. I love that language. It's wonderful. So they're the 6 needs of the ego. The need to look good, the need to be right, the need to justify, the need to know, the need to judge, and the need to get even. And I've given you some insight into unresourceful and resourceful expressions of those. And of course, those unresourceful and resourceful examples I've given you are not exhaustive. There'll be a lot more depth to that. As I said, I explore these needs in a much deeper way in the emotional fitness formula. By the way, my website is now live, joepane.com.au. It's still at its preliminary stages. There's enough information on there that I was willing to publish it. But there's a lot more that's going to be added and changing on that website over the next little while. For those of you who are listening to this podcast who are coaches and who are wanting to start your own business or have your own consultancy business, you might be interested in the realm of behavioral profiling. And on my website, joepane.com.au, on the website, there's a link to a free introductory training in August that I'm delivering as well, August 4 or 5. So feel more than welcome. If that's something that is of interest to you, feel welcome to join me on the Zoom training that goes for a whole day and a half. I had 191 people join me for the last one. It was just fabulous fun. So there you go, guys. That's the 6 needs of the ego. I trust that you got good value out of that. I certainly thoroughly enjoyed delivering this for you this week. And I look forward to tuning in with you for episode 39 coming up in another week. So have a great morning, a great afternoon, or great evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Enjoy. Talk soon. Thanks so much. I'm Joe Pane, and you've been listening to Insights, the podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. You can now follow my insights on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to being with you again very soon in the next episode of Insights, the podcast.